We are very glad to have you join us tonight. We started these Friday Night AIs now already a few years ago, and really the goal is to have more engagement between people like you here, thanks for coming, and researchers who work in the core areas of artificial intelligence. And I think that's very important, going both directions. We typically, as researchers, do a lot of cool stuff, but kind of keep it to ourselves, maybe share at conferences, so we don't really talk a lot about that broadly. I think it's interesting and helpful also to share, especially now that there are a lot of misconceptions about what AI can and cannot do. And then also conversely, we are always very interested to hear from the community, like what are the things that are on your minds when it comes to AI and various aspects. So that's the goal. And for tonight, really thinking about tools such as ChatGPT. The gentleman over here just showed me output from GPT 4.0 related to the song we are hearing. You probably also experimented with the DALL-E, and there are many other tools which are already in use by writers and designers trying to streamline workflows, maybe spark inspiration, and in general, just push creative boundaries. So there are a number of questions that arise from that. For instance, how does AI redefine traditional creativity in domains such as art, music, literature, or design? Can we really consider AI to be creative, or is it mainly just trying to mimic human creativity? And what will be good ways for humans and AI to collaborate effectively when it comes to creativity? So tonight I'm joined by professors and students who are thinking deeply about AI and creativity, also about the inner workings on AI and the impact of these technologies on society. So I have here Wana Ignat. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Michigan. She completed her PhD in 2022. And she's also an incoming assistant professor at Santa Clara University. Her research interests are at the intersection of language and vision, where she works on developing models that work equally well across demographics, such as income, race, gender, language, or culture. And she's also passionate about research applications for social good impact and the use of AI to attract and retain minorities in CS. We also have Garrett Schumann over there. He is a composer, music scholar, and writer who teaches music-oriented courses for University of Michigan College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. Last year, Garrett published features about the historical and contemporary use of AI by composers and experimental musicians in the New York Times and Chamber Music magazine. You might have seen Garrett last year, right here at the library, where he gave a presentation entitled When AI Enters the Concert Hall. And in addition to the research interests I mentioned, he is also interested in identity structures in music, heavy metal music, and the connection between music and place. And right here we have Joshua Ashkenazi, a PhD student in information science at the University of Michigan. He's interested in the intersection of computational social science and AI, and especially interested in how these dynamics play out with collectives. We have other people here, Zilin Wang, who welcome you when you came in. He's a PhD student in the AI lab at the University of Michigan, working on research in computer vision, and he's been providing support throughout this series of events for this year. Also, Christina Certo, she also welcomed you when you came in, and she's also been providing support. With that, a few logistics. For the first 20 minutes, we'll have more of an interactive activity where Josh, Garrett, and Wana will lead you through a couple of hands-on activities so you can experience some of the creativity in today's AI tools. You have a handout that you picked when you enter. And after that, we'll have a conversations about some of the questions that I brought up on various aspects of AI and creativity. And we'll make sure to leave the last 10, 15 minutes for questions from you. So if you have questions, please hold on to them until we get to that part, and you will have an opportunity to ask them. All right, so with that, we can get started. Friday Night AI is a collaboration between Michigan AI and the Ann Arbor Public Library, which is graciously hosting us here. And the event is also broadcasted on YouTube, so you can watch later on or share with family and friends. All right, so we can get started. Maybe Josh, I'll pass it on to you.
Sure, okay. So obviously creativity is very hard to define. It's kind of this nebulous concept. In general, people define it as something which is both novel and useful. And so over the years, psychologists tried to come up with many different ways to measure this. And they kind of broke creativity down to two kinds. So one is divergent thinking, which is coming up with different uses for things, like thinking differently maybe. And another kind of creativity is convergent thinking. So it's like trying to solve problems or maybe think through things logically. And within the divergent thinking group, one of the most common tasks that people do is called the alternate uses task. And so the idea is that you just come up with really crazy uses of common objects. So I guess I'm curious what kind of things that people come up with for these.
So maybe. You see a hand over there?
Oh,
Tires, you can put paint on the tire and create a large painting.
Can you use the microphone, please?
For painting, you could take a tire and put paint on the tire, roll the tire across a very large canvas, and utilize various tires with paint in order to create a painting.
You do need a large surface for that.
If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll make my way over to the microphone.
Do you want to raise your hand?
For a pair of pants, you could cut them up and make them car rags. You could make bags if you tie up the legs and put stuff in them. You could put them on the wall as a decoration. You could use them as window shades if you're hard up. You can make them donations to the Salvation Army, and you can tear them up and use them as fuel, or just separate them and use them as a canvas.
a ball. And did anybody have an idea for a ball?
As a piñata, swinging at it. Yeah. Putting candy in it somehow, like if it's hollow inside, depending on what type of ball it is. Yeah. And also sports knowledge.
Thank you.
A doorstop.
Make a hole in them and put them on the edge of the feet of a chair so it would slide and not tear up the floor.
Like a trap, you can put a door at the top of a door and, the ball. And when you open the door, the ball falls and hits you. Yeah.
Actually, I had one for pants that came to mind. You cut off the legs and make cutoffs.
So for the tire, you can also set it on fire. And for example, if you are isolated on an island, right, you want to attract attention, and you can just set it on fire, and it's gonna create dark fogs. So. Yeah.
How did the tire get on the end? Sorry, that's the second question.
Oh, what's sorry?
I was just joking. How did the tire get on the island if you are isolated and you need to set the fire to attract attention? How did you get that in the first place? They're just pursuing the creativity piece.
Maybe it's brought by the wave, maybe, yeah.
For pants, you could tie the ends up and you can make them into a windsock or a sail. If you're really hot up in a place where you've got dirty water, you do the same and use it as a water filter. Or you could cut smaller holes into them and make it into a fishnet.
Should we go to the AI one? Or just, do we go to the AI like this?
Did you want to say something about the GPT?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes.
It's just a little confusing because I see pants and tires are having more specific usage, but ball is a much wider concept. So I wouldn't say anything's common or unusual for a ball.
So if I had a ball, I could cut it and make it a hat.
Yes.
I could cut it and make it a mask. I could also bang on it and make it a drum.
Okay, a lot of very cool ideas. So now we're going to talk about some of the GPT ones. Well, I'm curious, before people actually looked at these, did you have any kind of prior conception of GPT and creativity? Like, did you think it would come up with good or bad ideas? And then after you looked at them, what are people's thoughts of those?
I don't think the ChatGPT answers are particularly creative at all. They're just extensions of, they're not alternatives in the sense of divergent. They're not, none of them struck me as something I wouldn't, if I had enough time, be capable of thinking of.
I don't know if you shortened the list, but it seems like a very, very, very short list for each of the alternative uses.
Well, yeah, we only asked it for a couple. That's one thing it's good at, better than a human. You know, you could say give 50 and it will kind of give those. I mean, some things to point out about the ChatGPT ones very quickly is that even though some of them do seem very creative, you see it's also kind of formulaic. Like all of them are like plan holder X, right? And interestingly, when we did an experiment, we compared what humans and AI thought, and all the AI ideas are always very long usually, unless you tell it to be shorter. And we found this is true with a lot of different domains, so like shortening, so people make Wikipedia edits, for example, AI also tends to sort of write much longer than humans, and so even though these are creative, you tend to see some kind of patterns that might give away that it's AI.
All right. So, thank you. Maybe next we can hear from Juana about the music that you've been hearing as you walked in. You want to say a few things about that?
Sure. So if you remember the background music and also the pictures, maybe you noticed the pictures were a bit related to the music. So all that, the music and the pictures were AI generated. The pictures were generated from text. So I put the title of the song as a prompt, so as an input to the model, like give me an image of Hello World. That was the first song. And then DALL-E 2, that's the model we used, generated the images. And the music is also generated by AI from an app called Suno AI. It's online, you can test it out. It's very nice. I think it's also progressing. It's always developing more. And yeah, my favorite song there was Hello World. Like they said Hello World in a lot of languages, and also the images were very international. So yeah, I encourage you to check it out. Yes?
How do you spell that app, please?
SUNO. Sure.
You'll see on the next page, you all are going to write some prompts using the little handout at the end of your packet for a different AI music generator, Google's MusicFX. And Suno is listed at the bottom. I listed some very accessible AI music programs that are all browser-based. Suno is one of them, what Oana used. Google Music FX is also browser-based and free to use. And we'll hear what it sounds like in a little bit. Holly Plus is a little different. It's a vocal model created by an experimental musician and composer named Holly Herndon. And so you can upload an existing sound file that you have, piece of music, speaking, into Holly Plus, and it will render it using a model of her voice. And then BandLab is a more sophisticated tool. It's a digital audio workstation that's browser-based, but it has a AI component called Song Starter. So you can select the style that you want it to create, and it'll create like the beginning of a song for you that you can edit in the digital audio workstation. So like if you're familiar with MIDI, BandLab's tool uses MIDI, so that allows you to take it across different programs and that sort of thing. So, but it's also, you have to create a free account, but anyone could use BandLab. So these are some things that you could experiment with after tonight. And Suno, as we heard with Oana's examples, makes much more sophisticated outputs than what we'll hear from Google Music FX, but we can talk about that. So I'm not going to read the introduction here. It's just a little background on Music FX. But what I want to direct your attention to is the sample prompt that I include at the bottom of this opening introduction. Because what you're going to do now is you're going to write your own short prompts, 1 to 2 sentences long. And I recommend that you tell, Christina and Zealand are going to collect your little handouts, and I'm going to type a few. I'm going to pick some out of the bag and type them into Google Music FX, and we'll listen to it live. I recommend that you talk about, in your prompt, that you talk about the tempo, maybe some stylistic cues, and if you want to get more specific, you can list an instrument that you want to hear. Suno, you could hear, had lyrics and singing. Google Music FX doesn't do that as well, so don't count on that necessarily. And the example I have here, slow jazz in the background of a library lobby on a Friday night, must include saxophone. That gives it a nice setting to try to match to, and then also some instrumental cues too. That is something that I did. I did not bring the music file, but you all can go home and type that in if you want to hear a version of that. So please, I want to hear the music that it creates with your prompts, not my prompt. So please take a few minutes to write a prompt down on this small sheet at the back of your packet. Our support people will come pick them up. And I want to say, if you want a chance to win a shirt, you should make sure you put your name at the bottom. So let's take a couple minutes. What's the password for this laptop? Yep. So when you're done, you can raise your little sheet into the air, and we'll come around and collect them. And I'll pick a couple, and we can listen to them. You will see how quickly it works. So what's very impressive about this is how quickly it works and how responsive it is. Thank you. Great. I'll let you and then you pick two. Pick one each. That'll be fun. And then I think two is enough. I think two is enough.
At 7:30 it's done, right? Time flies.
It's very fast. It takes like 30 seconds to finish. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to let our wonderful host, Rada, pick the first one. So this is, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, this is from Ahanya. Can you raise your hand? Great, there in the back. Acoustic music for a warm summer evening. So I'm going to type that in. I just told it to make that. And it will start playing when it's done in about 30 seconds. Very nice. Let's give Ahanya a round of applause for writing a great prompt.
It makes me wonder if we applaud the AI or applaud the prompt, or both.
That's kind of, I guess, an underlying question for this event. And then Oana's going to pick the second one. Okay, great. This is from Joseph Berga. Great. Jazz, upbeat accompanying scat singing, including piano, saxophone, drums, and trumpet. Very specific. Jazz. Okay, I asked it to generate that. Personally, I've never heard music effects have voice, so I'm curious if it does that or not. You can maybe already hear some differences between what the... Okay, great. Let's applaud Joseph for giving us great prompts.
All right, so thanks for your contributions, and we encourage you to experiment more. Maybe you've been doing that already. If not, just give it a try. Some of the tools that were mentioned here, and even just be curious in general. These kind of tools constantly appear, and so trying them out, it's something that you can learn both with respect to figuring out what are the limitations and also what are the opportunities to help you create maybe even more. All right, so with that, we're gonna move into the panel side of the event, just to learn a little bit more about the thoughts that Juana and Garrett have on AI and creativity. But before we do that, can you share a little bit more what got you interested in the intersection between AI and creativity? Juana, did you want to start?
Sure. So for me, it kind of happened by chance. So I remember I was at an internship during my third year of the PhD at Meta, and they were interested in a project on inspiration detection from social media posts. So they wanted to see if we can build a model that can detect posts that are inspiring to people on social media. And that's how I got into it. So I started reading more about what is inspiration, and there was no work on inspiration in machine learning or in computer science. Most work was done in psychology. So it was really exciting to start with a new problem for computer science. And then I started collecting data. So there were some posts that where, if you remember on Facebook, you can say, I'm feeling inspired, for example. And then you can find those posts that people are feeling inspired. And then I started analyzing what makes people inspired. And inspiration is also connected to creativity and happiness. So I really like this area of research, and I wanted to do more on my own. So now, as a postdoc, I'm actually continuing this project. I try to extend it on different modalities. So with vision, before I only used text, and also to other cultures, because I was focusing on English, but also you can study this in other languages, and what is inspiring for someone in one culture is not inspiring to another person. So it's good to look at diverse data. So yeah, that's a little story on how I got interested in this topic.
Thank you. And Garrett, do you want to share about your
Sure.
path into it?
So unlike Oana and Rada, I'm not a computer scientist. And I know generally how different types of artificial intelligence technology work, but I don't have technical expertise. I am a composer. All my degrees are in composition, and I do other work like writing, and I had a chance to write something for the New York Times on this topic, and I knew other composers who were using machine learning and knew a little bit of the history of this technology in the field of experimental classical music, and I learned a lot more writing that article, and then I had a chance to do some more research for a different magazine, a trade magazine called Chamber Music, over the summer. Since then, and especially once the university launched UMGPT, and it became kind of an endorsement for this technology as a fact of life for somebody who teaches college students. I've addressed it more in my classes with LSA, but always as a cultural topic. I'm very interested in this current moment with AI and what it illuminates about the structures around technology in our society in the United States. And it's been interesting to see my students have a lot of mixed feelings about the technology, but they did like, I brought many of the things that I list here at the bottom of that activity introduction into my class in the winter, and my students really enjoyed it. So there are pros and cons, I would say.
And that's the purpose of this conversation, to think more about that. But before we go into these pros and cons, just to get a little bit of background on how these models work, can we get just a brief overview, I would say in lay terms, of the kind of AI that provided, for instance, support for the activities that we've seen? Juana, do you want to say a few things about how the AI models work in general?
Sure. So I can say very briefly about the architecture of the image generator, so text to image, and also the text to audio or the songs you heard. Very briefly, it's a model called encoder-decoder architecture. So the input information is encoded into a vector or some information that it can be processed by the computer. And then the vector is decoded or decompressed into the output signal. So that could be the image or the song. And all of this model is trained, is usually a neural network that is trained with a lot of data, so similar data to what you saw and heard, so that the model can learn how exactly to match these two modalities and create new information.
Thank you. So, and from what I know, the more data, the better, right? So in general, it's like lots and lots of data. And in fact, it's not atypical for models to be trained on pretty much everything you can imagine and you see on the internet. So that's the case with the large language models, but also with this language vision. So a lot of the data out there. Garrett, there is anything that you wanted to add? Or?
Well, I'll just say from my point of view as somebody who's looked at how this technology is and has been used in music, before what Oana just described is a more recent form of this technology. So like the first piece of music composed by a computer, that happened in the 1950s and at the University of Illinois. And until recently, because of limits in computation power, a lot of the sophisticated artificial intelligence in music was done with very, very complicated algorithms, so very, very sophisticated rule-based systems. So you see really impressive stuff done in the 1980s. There's a composer, George E. Lewis, who teaches at Columbia University, who developed an improvising computer in the 1980s that would listen to what the humans who played around it did, and then through this very sophisticated algorithm, perform its own music against that. And so people have been doing a lot of really cool stuff in a very experimental and narrow way for a long time. But now we see, because of this, what the technology Oana described, it's much more accessible. It's become much more accessible.
And you mentioned that in your class, for instance, students have noticed limitations, and probably yourself. Can you say a little bit about your views on how is this technology limited in ways of producing creative content?
Well, let's talk about the music we heard earlier. So, in my opinion, what Oana was able to generate with the tool she used, Suno, is much more impressive than what Google Music FX. No offense to Google. I know they have an office in Ann Arbor, but it just doesn't do as much, and it can't do as much. The data the audio data that they use is just taken from like YouTube and that sort of thing, and you can really hear, because YouTube's audio is very heavily compressed in terms of its data, you can hear that it doesn't sound that good. The jazz we heard that was supposed to sound old-timey, and a recording that wouldn't be as high fidelity as what we would expect now, I think it sounds a little bit better than something that's trying to be more contemporary sounding. That will change. But with outputs like that, even the songs that Oana made and what we heard tonight, it's very difficult to use them creatively unless you treat it like an existing piece of audio that you might sample. And I'll say BandLab, which I talked about a little bit before, because it generates all the sounds using the MIDI instruments it has as like a piece of music production software. You can do a lot more with that creatively, and that's what my students who had rewarding experiences with, they were students who like already made beats and stuff for fun, and they're like, oh, it can help me get started using this program, the BandLab, something they already used. And they're like, then I can customize it. It's very difficult. It would be onerous to customize the songs that MusicFX made or that Suno made. And so in that way, I find it pretty limited creatively.
Wanna anything to add, or we can also move to the...
I was thinking also about in general, how the machine learning models are limited by the data, the amount of data they have, and we know that in the future it's going to be very few textual data left, like new textual data to further improve, to further train these models. So we need to build more efficient and more effective models in the future.
And maybe actually you mentioned doing work on inspiration in other languages, for instance, like the kind of generation that we see, to what extent is representative of other cultures. Would that be a limitation as well?
Yes. So that's part of my research actually. We noticed that most of the AI models are trained on Western data, so the output is going to be also from a Western perspective. And if we want all the communities, all the global communities to use these models, we also want them to be represented in the data. And because otherwise, these models could lead to cultural homogenization. So would mean that maybe we cannot see other cultures represented in these models, and wouldn't work as well for other cultures. So we have to be careful with that.
So then, speaking of creativity and AI as a creative entity, is it truly creative, or is it mainly mimicking human creativity? Garrett, you mentioned like learning from YouTube. Juana, you also mentioned the fact that it needs data to learn from. So what are your thoughts on that? Juana?
So I would think it's a bit of both. So in a sense that it's learning from other people's data, it can still produce new information or a bit modified. So I was thinking that humans also learn from others. Very rarely you have something from scratch, right? Like you get inspiration as an author or a music producer from other music or books you read. So I see AI like that, but it also needs much more data, much more training data than a person needs. So there's also the risk of memorizing some information. And also recently I started reading more about this, and I saw a paper that tried to actually measure creativity of large language models, and they created a test, a standardized test to measure creativity that's based very similar to what they use for humans. And they saw that usually stories written by large language models pass this test 10 times less frequently than humans do. So they seem to be much less creative, at least regarding this test.
Garrett, do you have thoughts on this?
I would say, I think building off of that it does parts of the creative process well, but it doesn't replace creativity, I think, because like the way we used it tonight is not really like a creative act. It's like curation, maybe, like it replaces going to Spotify, perhaps, like. But I think that paper you just talked about is interesting because you can see it do like some things that you would expect, but it can't do the whole package. And I was talking to someone earlier this week about it, where it's like it can create components that then you can use creatively. And it can do certain things really, really well. From the research and writing I've done, like the most successful AI tools in music that I know about do something, like one thing that's very specific very, very well, like auto-tune. Auto-tune is algorithmic, that's artificial intelligence. It's very good at what it does. And originally it was designed as a corrective editing thing, and then auto-tune became an aesthetic thing that people explore creatively. But it only does one thing. I think sometimes when you expect it to be able to do anything, which is kind of how some of these tools are marketed, that's where it falls short.
Thank you. And I think that's something to keep in mind, just with respect to whenever you use these tools, like take them with a maybe grain of salt. And one thing that actually really changed my way of thinking about creativity and AI, and I give credit to a speaker we had in the AI lab last year, Alyosha Efros, and he showed an output from DALL-E, which is this tool to create images. And for me, it had a wow effect. It was this mix between a dinosaur and a bird and a rainbow of colors. So it really was an image that I've never seen before. And I was thinking, wow, this is super creative. But then the next thing he did was show the most similar images from the web. And guess what? There are a lot of images that looked exactly like that one. So there was someone or many other people, maybe, I don't know, someone who produced that, and that's already there, except maybe we haven't seen it because it trains from so much data. You haven't seen it. You think like, wow, AI is really creative, but maybe it's already there in the training data. So I think keeping that in mind, it gives perspective. As we talk about AI and creativity, I think we should also talk, I would say, it's the elephant in the room, which connects to all these examples we've seen before, like ownership, right? So what we've heard before, the pieces that Garrett played, eventually learn from YouTube. So there are maybe pieces of the music that we heard that somebody actually took the time to compose them. So I'm curious what you think about that, about ownership and attribution when it comes to this creative AI. No, it's a hard question.
Well,
Anyone wants to start?
Well, I think it's important to understand that these big public-facing tools are the data. They didn't pay for the data that they used. They just took it from the internet. And that doesn't make me feel good. There are other tools that are more specific, like there's a sound synthesis engine I learned about called Rave that was developed at IRCAM, which is a very fancy acoustics and electronic music institute in Paris, France. And the guy who developed it a couple years ago designed it to imitate recorded sounds, and it only needs 3 hours of training data. And it's really, really good. And so you see experimental musicians using this because a percussionist can record themselves playing the marimba for 3 hours, put it into this synthesis engine that uses machine learning, and then create a piece where they play against themselves. They own that because they created the training data. And so that's something that I find really exciting. And it's also open source. A lot of these things are pretty accessible to an extent, at least. And so I think there's some really exciting things that value that, but in general, ownership and copyright is not a concern because it would get in the way of the development of the technology. So.
Yeah, I think there needs to be more work in this aspect, like even laws or policies put in place, because there's a lot of policies and rules for human copyright, but very few work on machine copyright and authorship. So I think there is ongoing research on this direction, so maybe in a few years we'll be more clear about this information. Because right now it's pretty blurry, because AI is using human data to train on, but then it still produces something new. So is that considered, should we also copyright AI? There's a lot of questions that need answers, and I'm sure that people are working on this.
And I think one technical challenge right now is tracking the output to the source. And you see that, for instance, in ChatGPT, it looks all good, but it doesn't mean that it all was generated by ChatGPT itself. And you may be aware, some of you, about the case between New York Times and OpenAI, where New York Times showed many of their articles can actually be reproduced or are reproduced by ChatGPT, right? And then the claim is that that was the output of ChatGPT, whereas really it was the New York Times writers. And that is a big case that eventually is really about human creativity versus AI. I think it will be interesting to see these and other cases, how they settle. And because right now you cannot really track the output to the source, there is no claim that you can make. So how can you demonstrate that what ChatGPT just produced, you wrote it in the first place? And as Juana said, it's right now that's fairly blurry. And I think sometimes companies eventually take advantage of that because you cannot track them. Then you say, well, it's mine. And on the contrary, we see what is surprising to me, that OpenAI is in fact prohibiting others to use their output, especially other companies, so they don't leverage what they produce, which is interesting. All right, so with that, we have about 10 more minutes, so we can now take questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and somebody will come with a microphone. See here, one, right here. I don't know, I saw that hand first, but over there.
When it comes to the creativity of hypotheses, sometimes called paradigmatic imagination, which is all about connecting known knowledge in a novel way that lets you make hypotheses about forming new knowledge, or also hypotheses that are about innovation. Is anybody working on that in your lab or anywhere about that kind of creativity? As opposed to artistry? You know?
So I know there is some work in brainstorming, so that would be one way of generating hypotheses.
Yeah, but it's not brainstorming. It's, I mean, really mimicking human intelligence. The way that you all come up with hypotheses.
Actually, somebody in my lab is working on something like that.
Do you want to take the microphone if you don't mind?
Yeah, I think that's like kind of a new area of research. Somebody in my lab is looking at something like that, and they're looking at whether the hypotheses that the LLMs generate are more like certain scientists than other scientists. Like, for instance, does it reproduce like male standpoints or things like that? So what lab is that? Just computational social science lab.
In the School of Information, to give a little bit more of a pointer.
I have two questions, one for Lana and one for Garrett.
We'll take one at a time just to make sure that everyone gets a chance, and then we can come back.
So I'll do it to Lana. Are they working so that AI can generate artificial intelligence for emotional intelligence? Is any work being done in that area?
You mean work on emotion intelligence for machines?
Yeah, so the machine can feel what's going on with a person, like an AI therapist, as it were.
Yeah, there is some work for like empathetic communication. Like Rada actually has a lot of work on that to try to build dialogue systems that can communicate with people in an empathetic way.
Yeah. So they could read faces or things like that, the sound of the voice?
So in our lab, I think we mostly work with text. So only messages, dialogue in the sense of message, but it's very interesting to also extend it to different modalities and look at people's face. Yeah.
Okay.
See, over there in the back. Oh, sorry. Next.
If you're doing text-to-image like in DALL-E, can you also limit the amount of input, like say, I want an image that's like abstract expressionism of the 1950s or something like that?
Yeah, actually, they're pretty good at that. So if you put the style you want the image in, it's going to try to match that style. So the style of a specific painter or a certain time period. You can play around. The more details you give, I think the more, the better it is. But at some point, it's going to also make some mistakes. So yeah, you just try multiple times. And also they continue building new models. So there's now DALL-E 3. So there's different versions every year, I think. So it gets better and better.
Okay, thanks.
Guys here?
question, because a lot of people, well, I will say, it seems to be sometimes people are kind of spectacle, this is for Alana, sorry, spectacle around what is actually like inspiration, or, you know, what does inspiration actually mean? Because people think like it has so many different meanings for different people, you know? Have you found any context around how you were able to really demonstrate what is inspiring, or like, is it still like with every culture, like you're saying, it's kind of different, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm actually working on a paper right now on that, and I try to extend the research from English, or more like Western data, to very specific countries like India and UK. And we notice there are different things that are inspiring depending on your culture. But also there's some disagreement, because we try to annotate some of this data with humans, and we saw the agreement is usually kind of fair or moderate. So, and it makes sense because it's also kind of personal. So not everyone is going to be inspired maybe by David Attenborough if they're not so interested in nature documentaries. So it's a lot about what your background, your culture, interests. Yeah, but there's more work to do in that domain. Sure.
This is a question for Garrett. You mentioned the aesthetics of the art and creativity. So this touches on that, and what ethical boundaries are applied to this whole research department going on? I know I just collapsed 2 domains.
I think right now that's really up in the air, the ethics of it. I think unfortunately, you can see, like, already, if we take popular music for example, that's an industry that is already very exploitative in a lot of different ways, and so the norms in that field don't bray against whatever is exploitative about the AI. It's interesting, I was thinking on the way here, you may be aware that the hip-hop artists Drake and Kendrick Lamar had a feud that played out on a series of diss tracks. And early on, after Drake released one of his responses, people were like, oh, I hope this is AI, because then he won't be responsible for it. But in one of Kendrick Lamar's most popular assaults on Drake, the hook in the song that goes BBL Drizzy, that is an AI-generated melody and sample. And people were really excited about it because it connected. And so part of it is like, are you using it in a persuasive way creatively that people can look past whatever discomfort they have? And the same is true when recorded music came out, and people were probably like, why are you playing a recording instead of going to a concert where people are playing? Or when pianos were very popular, and so you could have a piano accompany a singer instead of an ensemble of performers. I think similar ethical quandaries have arisen in the history of music. This is just a very contemporary version of it. But I thought that the role AI played in sort of the interpretation of that feud between Drake and Kendrick Lamar was very interesting to me, because when the producer, I think Metro Boomin is the producer, revealed that he used AI to create the hook for that BBL Drizzy song, and that was something that he waived his copyright on, so people could remix it as much as possible without fear of getting their stuff taken down online. It became like people rallied around it as they made it creative, as opposed to what the computer did. That's what I would say. But it's interesting how like AI being like a cheating thing or something, those concerns went out the window when it was something people enjoyed interacting with. So.
All right, so since we are at time, I think we can do the drawing for the T-shirt, right? Maybe we put back, that was the plan. We can put back the
Oh, we already put them back.
There's
Yeah.
another one.
Okay, already. So Garrett will give you the honor.
Oh, okay, great. Kay Shen. Congratulations.
All All right, so as a final note, one of the people who helped with this event is Aura Bunescu, and she sent me a screenshot from a human, which I want to read at the end of this. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing. Not for AI to do my art and writing so that I can do my laundry and dishes. So we hope to welcome you to a Friday Night AI on AI and laundry, maybe in the near future. And with that, many thanks to Ann Arbor District Library for hosting us, to Christina in the back for all her help throughout all these events. Also, of course, our wonderful panelists, Juana and Garrett, and also Joshua and Zilin, who's been also helping with this. So thanks, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Yes, thank you very much to our hosts. I'm just going to point one thing out as you make your way out. If you see on the pillars, there is a QR code if you're interested in signing up for the mailing list for events like this. Otherwise, feel free to check out any of our other events at AADL as well. Thanks so much and have a good night, everybody.